Rather than rushing headlong into a definition of allegory, let's see if you can talk about it from example. So yesterday we started talking about symbol from examples of symbols. Let's start talking about allegory from examples of allegories. Ideas? You've never encountered this word before in instruction. I find that hard to believe from Southeast students who have been through freshman year, because I know Mr. Carr, Mrs. Beverly, and Mrs. Glasby all feature allegory on their curricula. Yes? It has to do with symbolism in people. Do you remember what piece of literature last year you may have read in which allegory was a main concept? Josiah? Animal Farm. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're dealing with Animal Farm. Now, Josiah, what do you remember about the concept of allegory connected to Animal Farm? What does it mean?
Wasn't it like communism and many different characters and different world leaders at that time?
All right, so what connections do any of you remember? Who equaled what? Daniel? Napoleon represents Stalin. Phil, did you have another one? Yeah, they had different farmers, and I can't remember actually. The only farmer I remember from the novel, it's been years, was Farmer Jones. And who did Farmer Jones represent? Call it out. The Tsar, Tsar Nicholas II. And then other farmers represented Churchill and other sorts of foreign powers. Anybody else?
The dogs of the police.
Ah, hold on the dogs being the police just for a moment, because that's actually more important. I want to get rid of the stuff that's less important first. That's also more important. So we're rushing headlong into this. Here's what I want to caution you about. Orwell's use of allegory is very simple on some levels. Napoleon equals Stalin. Snowball equals, anybody remember? Trotsky. Old Major equals Marx or Lenin, depending upon how you read it, but Marx works. That's simple. And that's not the type of allegory that we're focusing on. It won't be useful for us with a separate piece. So if you start to think, which world leader does Finney represent, then you will confuse yourself and you will end up nowhere. Allegory is better when we're talking about characters representing ideas, especially aspects of human nature. So, Devante, remind us of your example, because your example is probably the best example from Animal Farm. Ooh, anybody remember the fancy term for the working class? The bourgeoisie is the middle class. That's good, you're in the same proletariat. Thank you very much. This works better because Boxer does not represent one individual person, one individual specific instance. Rather, Boxer represents an entire class of people, an entire class of characteristics, a set of characteristics. Can we talk about what those characteristics are? What are Boxer's characteristics? Bailey? Oh, come on. You can do it. You never talk, but I know you know answers. Give me a characteristic of Boxer. There you go. I'll give you a fancy word for that. Industrious. Courtney. Say hardworking, we'll pick out something else. Come on, he's got positive and negative character traits. Do you remember the alphabet thing? Trying to learn his alphabet? Anybody recall the alphabet issue? Corinne? What happens when he tries to learn the alphabet? That's right. So he can, I think it was 3 at a time he could remember. He remembers ABC, and he remembers ABC, and then somebody tries DEF, probably Snowball, and then he forgets ABC. So he can only remember 3 letters, which means that he is what? What? He's kind of dumb. Okay, so fancy word. Let's see, industrious. Unintelligent. This is not the thinker. Phil. Excellent. So he is a follower. Napoleon is always right. Josiah. Good. So resilient. I like that. David? How do we know that Boxer represents the working classes? Zach?
Because all those characteristics are of the working class.
We got to be careful about running into circular logic, and let me explain why. Symbolism aimed toward answering two questions. Do you remember that from yesterday? What two questions do we have to answer about symbols? Comment was the second one. What is the author saying about it? What's the first one, Sarah? What does it represent, and what is the author saying about it? Same two questions for allegory. The question of representation. The question of comment. Does Orwell like the working classes? No? You don't think so? Do you like Boxer as a character? Yeah, I like Boxer as a character, therefore I like the working classes. Does Orwell criticize the working classes? How so? By saying they are resilient and loyal to a fault, that their lack of intelligence takes their strength and perverts it for the powerful, that they are too stupid to realize that they're being used. That's the comment. So when I look at this, those are the facts that are his comment. That's what he's trying to tell me about the working classes. Because I might not automatically know that the working classes are stupid, that they are not intellectual, that they're not reflective. I might not know that their resilience is coupled with a instinct to follow that is damaging. So, Zach, getting back to it, if I'm using this to answer this question, then I've got to use something else to answer representation. So how do I know that Boxer represents the working classes? Think simple plot issues. He's the one doing the work. What is Snowball? If Snowball were not Trotsky, if he were a class of people, what class of people would he represent? Not nobility, because that would be somebody who would be more like Farmer Jones. I'm sorry? You're getting closer to it, but there's some other little niche that you're missing. The academics, the college professors, the teachers, the thinkers, those people. He represents them. How do we know? He helps teach people how to read. What else does he do that helps me understand that he's a teacher thinker? Yeah, he comes up with plans for the windmill. He's the thinker. How do I know? Answering the question of representation, because of what he does. How do I know the Boxer is the working class? Because of what he does. When Boxer faces a problem, what is his reaction? I will work harder. I will work harder. Brute strength. He's the working classes. It's obvious. It's not a very difficult allegory. When Snowball faces a problem, what's his reaction? Phil? Yeah, I will develop a plan. I will think about this. I will apply the concepts of animalism to physics and engineering, and I'll come up with a plan. What is Napoleon's reaction to? Okay, control other people to do it for him. Very good. So this is the autocrat. This is the tyrant. Now we start to understand how we can figure out who they are, and then what the comment is. So the question of representation, think about this character and how this character acts. What does this character tend to do? And if this character faces a problem, how would this character deal with it? What does the character do in the situation? And then you can start to ask yourself, what is the author saying about this person? Does the author like this person or not like this person? Is the author balanced, critical, and complementary. Oh, we haven't really hit the solid definition of allegory, but I'll tell you what, I'll hit the solid definition of allegory when I pass out the same kind of sheet that I passed out yesterday. So it's 2 handouts in 2 days. I know, don't worry, I'm not starting a trend or anything here. Okay, your definition of allegory as presented on the sheet. It's a type of literature in which characters and plot events represent ideas such as elements of human nature. Through that representation, the author comments on those ideas. In other words, everything the same as symbolism, with the exception that we're talking about characters and plot events. We're not talking about concrete objects. So we'll look at individuals and actions rather than looking at just the concrete objects themselves. And in doing that, we've got to think about those characters. Now, this is what this is the Venn diagram that you constructed way back with Chapter 1 about Finney and Jean. So if you have these notes somewhere, then you might want to grab those, because just as we looked at the aspects of Boxer, those qualities, we'll look at the qualities of Jean and Finney as well and try to use that as evidence for our allegory. Oh, that's period 5. All right. Let's start talking about, well, I'll tell you what. Let's start by talking about Finney. Probably a bit easier. Jean's a little bit more of a complex character. Let's go to the answer first and then do the supporting thinking. What does Finney represent? Childhood. Why does this work for allegory? I can't say that Finney represents a tree. Why not? Isn't a trait or quality of human nature. Very good. Allegory owes a lot of its origin to these strange things called morality plays in medieval literature. So back before people could read and you needed to teach them stuff, and you didn't have formal schools because the schools were reserved for the clergy and other privileged people, you would perform entertainment for them. And if you wanted to tell people, hey, don't be greedy, then you would show a story in which a person encountered an allegorical representation of greed. And guess what the character's name was? Greed. So in these medieval morality plays, the representation of human nature would actually have that name. And quite often, 7 deadly sins kind of thing, sloth, envy, greed. These would be characters on the stage. Faith, chastity, some of the virtues. These would be characters. And the central character was often called Everyman. That was his name, because he was supposed to represent the average person. So these medieval morality plays were not subtle at all. And they just represented qualities of human nature, aspects of us. So Finney can represent childhood. That works just fine, because that's an aspect of everybody. That's an aspect of human nature that is a fact of our existence. How do we know that he represents childhood? So in an essay, I'm saying Finney represents childhood. Knowles shows this when, fill in the blanks.
When persuades Jane to
Excellent. What does that show, Josiah?
shows that Finney sort of carefree, like that.
Beach shows his priority of play over work. Good. He would rather play than work. Do we have another example of that same priority of play over work?
When he wants to skip class.
When? Because this is skipping class also. What other time when he...
After he breaks his leg and he tells James they should just tell him that Finney had a rough time.
Okay, good. So he skips class when he comes back after breaking his leg. Another piece of evidence for that same thing. Oh, come on. The pivotal one, chapter 4.
Something out of the tree.
Well, yeah, instead of studying, right? And this is the conflict that leads to his crippling. So he would rather go to the SSSSS meeting and jump out of a tree than study. And he needs to study. But he prioritizes play over work. Good. So we have a trend of his behavior. He likes to play instead of working. Somebody give me something else. Daniel. He has a naive view of competition. And what are my examples? Snowball fight. Very good. Another example? That's too general. I want specific examples. Okay, swimming record is excellent. David? Yep. All right. Play over work. That seems like a child to me because you must convince children to do their homework. And most children will only do that under force, and they would rather find some way to entertain themselves. A naive view of competition. How do you see this in actual life? Where do you see children viewing competition as everybody wins? You ever have that experience? I'm sorry? Although kids can be pretty vicious at recess. Sarah? Watching one of the best experiences, and if you've never had this experience, you must have this experience, is watching 4, 5, 6-year-olds play soccer. They'll shoot on their own goal. They have no clue what's going on. It's called what? I've heard people call it Bumble Bee Soccer because they just all swarm. They have no sense of position whatsoever. There's no strategy. There's no athleticism. It's just everybody go after the ball. And then somebody will just wander off in the field and pay attention to something else. Right. Absolutely. And they have no sense of competition. How do the coaches react to this? They laugh. That's right. And they encourage it. They say, hey, that's fine. Go out there and have fun. That's right. And try to go for that goal. Coaches will not care about trading out players for a better player. They won't care about They won't care about unequal play time because you would give unequal play time to give your better players more play time. No, everybody gets equal play time because everybody's winning. In fact, what? How is it Charlie Sheen's game?
Everyone's winning.
Okay, right. Gosh, this. You know, somebody's going to archaeologically uncover our society in 3,000 years, and they're going to wrongly conclude that Charlie Sheen was the sage, wise advisor of our society, and that we had a religion based upon him.
Apparently yesterday he had the worst day of his life.
Did he?
When it was on the radio.
I need to sign up for his tweets. Anyway, okay, enough. The point is that this is fairly typical for children. This everybody wins attitude. When I am at games like this, and when I've been at games like this, I was often confused when I would see somebody keeping score. What are you doing? Keeping score. For God's sake, why? Nobody really cares who wins. It's all about being out there and having fun. And Finney exemplifies this view. Further evidence that we believe he's a child. Haven, you've been raising your hand for a little bit, so what's up? Oh, I apologize. I adapted this sheet. I teach the same concepts with different literature. I adapted this sheet from Lord of the Flies, and I forgot to trade out the author's name. Should be Knowles. Yeah. Yes. Although I see where you're going with that, with the denial aspect. However, I think that this might be a little bit of a weaker example, because doesn't he demonstrate, I think it's in chapter 2, knowledge of Allied bombing in Central Europe? That is true. That is true. He says, I'm not really sure that so that's excellent. So the denial might come up too. But I was just thinking initially, and Aaron, you might be right over me, but my initial thought was he seems to be the only person who brings up any current events about the war. Everybody else is not really talking about specifics. But you're right.
Like he knows about it, but he doesn't believe it.
I think we have one other quality, and that would help us understand that he represents childhood. And that last quality goes back to QAR number 1, really. What were you thinking, Connor? Now we're going to get into strengths and weaknesses there, so hold on to those ideas. Why did we decide Finney is an exceptional teenager? Because of his honesty. Even when small children try to lie, they are very poor at it, and it's laughable. Children will be honest to a fault. They don't understand about tact. They don't understand about keeping things to themselves because they don't want to hurt feelings. They don't understand respect in the sense of dishonesty. Sometimes we are dishonest as a token of respect. And you know that very well as students. Sometimes you keep your tongue and don't say what's on your mind because you know that there's a certain environment that must be maintained. Okay? Deceit for an adult purpose. Yeah, Finney has no clue. Finney is honest to a fault. He says anything that's on his mind at any point. That's a child thing to do. These are the qualities of a child. And that helps us understand that Finney represents childhood. Okay? That's the first question, the question of representation, how we understand what he means, what he represents. Second question is Noel's comment. And I've divided it into strengths and weaknesses. What are the strengths and weaknesses of childhood, according to Noel's? Which means that every time you give me an answer, there must be some novel support. Now, Connor, what were you talking about? Explain.
When you're a child in the summer, you can outside.
But Finney, in the winter, what happens to him in the winter? Therefore, what is Noel saying about childhood in relation to adult situations? A little bit stronger than that, but you're on the right path. Children cannot deal with adult situations. So what's my weakness here? Cannot handle real adult situations. This is a belief of Noel's. How do I know this belief? Talk to me about what happens to Finney. Specifically, how do I know Noel's believes this? He dies. Very good. Yes, he dies. If Noel's believed the opposite, he would survive and thrive. Have any of you seen, and this might be a little bit too much of a tangent, but not much. Have any of you seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off? You should watch it again after reading this. Huh? No, because Finney and Ferris are almost identical characters. And then Gene and Cameron are almost identical characters. Yeah. However, if you totally get it now, then you'll see how the ending is completely different, because at the ending of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Ferris wins. Ferris succeeds. Which is the film, once again, which is the filmmaker's way of saying, guess what? child attributes applied to adult situations can succeed. They're much more optimistic. Knowles is much more realistic. Knowles says, no, 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 no. You act like an idiot child in an adult situation, and you will die. Well, at least when war is concerned. So if you look, and it's actually an interesting, I in the past have made this an extra credit paper, but if you compare and contrast that film and this novel, you'll see that they're very identical in a number of ways. However, the outcome and the messages, in other words, this area of the discussion is different. Everything else is very similar, but this area is different. Okay, but more. Do we have strengths? What does Knowles like about childhood, according to his development of Finney? What is the strength of Finney?
You don't really care about anything, so there's no stress.
Oh, okay, so he's fairly relaxed, so it leads to happiness, right?
Yeah.
He's happy, whereas Gene is living in a state of what, constantly? What does he say? Yeah, panic or fear. Good. So the strength is happiness. Now that happiness, though, and here's something that I see, that happiness is not confined to Finney. That happiness goes where else? The people around him. Give me an example of him spreading his happiness and optimism. And keep going. Uh-huh. I think is it Patch Withers at that point? Patch Withers. Very good. And before that, which other teacher was he able to infect with happiness? Prudhomme. So 2 teachers, and we're talking about stodgy old teachers at a New England prep school. Probably about as humorless as you can get. And both of those men are made to smile and laugh. Why? Because of Finney's boundless idealism and optimism and his honesty. Is this a strength of happiness? Absolutely, and Knowles believes it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have written multiple plot events showing it. He writes multiple plot events showing that happiness is a strength of childhood. Anything else? So we criticize childhood because it can't deal with adult situations like the war or anything else serious. We love childhood because it keeps us happy. Anything else? Explain a sense of peace. Hmm? If I'm constantly focusing on the problems that the world is experiencing, the way the world is, what might I sometimes ignore? Did you have another comment, Josiah?
Oh no, I was going to say that I think we talked about the opposite of what only looking at
Realism. Right. And if I'm constantly looking at how the world really is, and I'm looking at all the problems of the world, what might I start to ignore? Possibly. What? All the positives, or the way the world should be, the way it could be. True leaders are able to see the solutions that are possible. And he's able to see that. If you have your books, open your books to the end. Toward the end, Gene, Finney's dead. Gene describes how he feels about Finney and how Finney continues on into his life. Can somebody find that passage for me, please? David, what page are you on? Sounds about right. Would you mind doing some reading? I believe it's a rather bulky paragraph on that one page, and everybody else 204.
Only Phineas never was afraid. Only Phineas never hated anyone. Other people experienced this fearful shock somewhere, this sighting of the enemy, and so began an excessive labor of defense. Began to parry and menace they saw facing them by developing a particular frame of mind. You see their behavior towards everyone and everything and everyone proclaimed, I am a humble ant, I am nothing, I am not worthy of this menace. Or else, like Mr. Lutterbury, how
it's a rather poetic and long-winded way of saying that Phineas treated people as friends, so he saw the positive possibilities of relationships with them, as opposed to everybody else who was looking at attack and defense, distrust. And that ability, if you turn a page earlier, leads Gene, and we won't go into this quotation as well, leads Gene to say that there's an aspect of Finney that stays with him. There's an aspect of that idealism that will remain with him to make him a better person. Amma?
Has nothing to do with what you're talking about.
Okay.
But what David described was
I'd have to take a look at it. It could be a run-on sentence. However, Amma, what you must realize always is that fictional works of literature are considered to be art, which means that you can certainly break some rules. There are different modes of writing, and what you write for me is usually considered to be very formal communication, argumentation, analysis, which means it's very rules-bound. But artists, writers, especially poets, delight in breaking rules for certain purposes. So it might be a run-on. I'd have to take a look at its construction. Okay, so the conclusion is obvious, right? Gene represents adulthood. Let's do the same thing. How do we know? Must have something to do with the way he acts.
He accuses Finney of when they go to the beach, after he thinks about it, he accuses Finney of giving him the opportunity to study, so sabotaging his studies.
Okay, so there are a couple different ways we could go with this beach incident. We could say that Gene is competitive, right? Okay, and we could also see that he, how do I want to say this, thinks too much. That he overanalyzes. And both of those connected to the beach incident. Tell me about more behavior, yeah.
Finney doesn't comprehend a child like mine to Finney. He doesn't understand Finney's idea of everybody winning. He thinks, well, if you win, then somebody has to win.
His idea of competition is the zero-sum game, which we probably discussed in class, where for every point I win, they must lose a point. Every time I advance, they retreat. So there's that natural balance. What other behavior does he seem to demonstrate that makes me think of adult behavior? Oh, so he's a follower? I'm not sure that I see him as very nurturing or supportive in the case of a parent figure. He's more enabling, and if you understand the word enable means that you see somebody's behavior and you allow them to go with that behavior regardless of what it might be. Whereas a parent would try to shape behavior and would try to say, hey, this is unhealthy, this is healthy, let's go for the healthy. An enabler says, hey, whatever you want to do, man, I'm right there with you. And I think he's more of an enabler. Probably somewhere on that Venn diagram is cautious. He is cautious. Now, he will take risks, but he is extraordinarily cautious. Somebody give me an example. The tree. Another example. Very good. His method of going to war is not to charge into war immediately, but sort of to cautiously enlist in the Navy. Also, if you take a look right before they skipped class to go to the beach, you'll see him thinking to himself how bad an idea it is. For a couple sentences, he'll talk about this is awful and we could break rules and we could get caught. Okay, we'll go ahead and do it. So he's constantly overanalyzing and being cautious about everything. He works. He studies. He understands studying. He understands shoveling snow. He understands all of the responsibilities that come with his position as student. And he meets those responsibilities.
You say he's trying to set his future, as an adulthood actually, he tries to
I would say that he does to a certain extent, Aaron. However, I also believe that Finney kind of stifles him from doing that. Because remember at that one point when the kids are planning like special enlistment programs and they're looking toward the future, he's not doing anything because Finney's there holding him back. So I think there's a large portion of the novel where Finney's denial is holding him back from advancing. He wants to, but he seems to want to most in the summer session. Remember when he's talking about being valedictorian and other sorts of long-term goals? However, once summer ends and winter comes around and Finney comes back, he stops thinking about the future. So I agree that he has that tendency, but it's not very strong in the novel because Finney's just kind of holding him back from it. Strengths and weaknesses? What's good? Okay, the weakness. The child's optimism and idealism, the child's passion for what is right and wrong, endows that child with a certain amount of strength. Now, if that strength were merged with adult ability and experience, that's a powerful person. However, unfortunately, as adults grow up, it's usually diluted a little bit. But children have this enormous sense of right and wrong, a passion for what they want that adults often lack. So he lacks strength. He lacks vitality. He's wishy-washy. He's a follower. Gene's kind of pathetic sometimes. He just does what anybody else tells him to. Haven. Okay. But he is practical. And practical means that he knows what's going to work and what's not going to work. He's aware of it. Whereas Finney's head's in the clouds. He has no clue what's going to work or not. And if he does something that works, it's usually accident, not planning. And of course, we know that he's practical and can succeed with real challenges. Why do we know that? Because he lives. Yay, he's alive. He lacks strength. He's kind of miserable and wishy-washy. However, he does succeed. Okay, as we end this discussion, you should realize that Knowles would absolutely love to have just a perfect merger of the two, where the strengths and weaknesses would meet, and then they would sort of fill in each other's weaknesses and cancel out. And then you'd have a fully realized, wonderful person. However, he doesn't give you that opportunity because it's impossible. The only thing he gives you is at the end a little bit of light saying that Gene, the adult, will carry some of the child with him.